I pulled into my parents' driveway that Christmas Eve, the trunk of my Honda, packed with carefully wrapped presents and a bottle of expensive wine I'd been saving for months. Snow dusted the familiar suburban lawns of my childhood neighborhood, and warm golden light spilled from every window of the two-story colonial where I'd grown up. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from the house as I grabbed my coat from the passenger seat. This was supposed to be perfect. Family time, holiday magic, all that nostalgic stuff that made December feel special. But as I hung my jacket in the front closet, their voices carried from the kitchen with crystal clarity. Mom was whispering urgently to Dad and my sister Amanda about moving her family into Frederick's condo because money was tight after Derek lost his construction job. They were plotting to present it as temporary assistance. But I heard them chuckling about how soft-hearted I was, how I'd never refuse family, and how they could stay as long as necessary. My stomach dropped as the truth hit me like ice water. Walking into the dining room felt like entering a theater where everyone except me knew their lines. The mahogany table gleamed under Mom's crystal chandelier set with her finest china and cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. Amanda sat at the far end, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her green eyes that seemed genuine enough. Derek hunched beside her, his broad shoulders slumped in what appeared to be defeated exhaustion, calloused hands fidgeting with his water glass. Their kids, 8-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Marcus, pushed food around their plates with the kind of listless energy that comes from sensing adult stress without understanding its source. Uncle Bill and Aunt Sarah had driven down from Portland, filling the room with their usual cheerful chatter about their retirement travels and Sarah's new pottery hobby. Grandma Helen occupied her traditional spot at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly styled, watching everything with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. The whole scene looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, complete with the massive turkey Dad had spent all day perfecting and Mom's famous green bean casserole that everyone pretended to enjoy. But underneath the holiday warmth, I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation. Mom kept glancing meaningfully at Dad, who cleared his throat several times like he was preparing for a speech. Amanda dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, building up to what I now knew was a performance designed to manipulate my emotions. Then it started. Amanda's voice cracked as she began talking about the eviction notice they'd received last week. How Derek's construction company had laid off half their crew right before Christmas. How they'd been scrambling to make rent while trying to keep Christmas normal for the kids. Her tears seemed real enough streaming down her cheeks as she described the shame of asking friends for help. The embarrassment of having to use food stamps, the fear of being homeless during the holidays. Derek chimed in with his own version of masculine vulnerability, talking about how hard it was to look for work when every construction site was shutting down for winter, how he felt like he was failing as a father and provider. He mentioned having to sell his tools, pawning his wedding ring, all the classic signs of financial desperation that would normally have me reaching for my wallet immediately. Mom and Dad played their parts perfectly. Mom reached across the table to squeeze Amanda's hand, murmuring soothing words about family sticking together through tough times. Dad nodded gravely, his weathered face creased with concern, as he talked about the importance of helping each other when life gets difficult. Even Grandma Helen got involved, mentioning how families used to live together for generations, how there was no shame in needing help. Uncle Bill and Aunt Sarah exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly feeling the weight of expectation in the room, but uncertain about what they were supposed to contribute. The kids had stopped eating entirely. Sophie's lower lip trembling as she listened to her parents describe their dire situation. That's when I decided to give them exactly what they wanted, just not in the way they expected. I set down my fork, took a deep breath, and let my voice fill with the kind of emotional intensity that would make them think their plan had worked perfectly. "You know what?" I said, my voice catching slightly. I can't sit here and listen to this without doing something. Amanda, Derek, you don't have to worry about rent anymore. You can move into my condo. It's just sitting there mostly empty anyway, since I've been staying at Sarah's place so much. The silence that followed was electric. Amanda's mouth fell open in genuine surprise. Derek blinked rapidly like he couldn't process what he'd just heard. Mom and Dad exchanged a look of stunned triumph, clearly not expecting their manipulation to work quite so quickly or completely. "Frederick, honey, are you sure?" Mom asked, though her eyes were practically glowing with satisfaction. "That's such a generous offer, but we don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm not pressured." I insisted, letting my voice get stronger with conviction. "I'm family. That's what we do for each other. Amanda, you and Derek and the kids can stay as long as you need. Don't even think about it as temporary. Think of it as your home now." Amanda burst into fresh tears, these ones apparently genuine as relief flooded her features. She jumped up from her chair and rushed around the table to hug me, her arms tight around my shoulders, as she whispered "thank you" over and over into my ear. Derek stood more slowly, his expression shifting from shock to something that might have been guilt before he extended his hand for a firm shake and mumbled his gratitude. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of excited planning. Mom started talking about which bedroom would be best for the kids, how they could rearrange the furniture to make everyone comfortable. Dad mentioned that he had a truck they could borrow for moving. Grandma Helen beamed with pride about her grandson's generosity, telling everyone within earshot that this was exactly the kind of family spirit that made the holidays meaningful. Sophie and Marcus perked up considerably as they began to understand that they weren't going to be homeless after all, that they'd be living in Uncle Frederick's cool downtown condo with the big windows and the swimming pool in the building. Amanda started crying again, but these were happy tears as she talked about how this would give Derek time to find a really good job instead of taking whatever he could get out of desperation. As I watched my family's genuine relief and gratitude, I felt a complex mix of emotions churning in my chest. Part of me felt guilty for what I was already planning, but a larger part felt coldly satisfied as I realized that their joy was built on lies and manipulation, that they saw my generosity as weakness to be exploited rather than kindness to be respected. The evening ended with more hugs, more tears, more promises about how temporary this arrangement would be, and how grateful they were to have family they could count on. As I drove home to my own apartment that night, I was already making mental lists of everything I needed to set in motion. They wanted to play games with my generosity, fine, but they were about to learn that I could play those games better than they ever imagined. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a whirlwind of activity that would have been heartwarming if I hadn't known the truth behind it. Amanda called me every morning with updates on their packing progress, her voice bright with excitement about their temporary move that was already starting to sound permanent in the way she talked about decorating and settling in. Derek had borrowed his brother's pickup truck, and they'd enlisted several friends to help with the heavy lifting, turning the whole move into a social event. I showed up Saturday morning with coffee and donuts for everyone, playing the role of the supportive brother perfectly. The January air was crisp and clear, with patches of snow still clinging to the shadowy corners of Amanda's apartment complex parking lot. Their current place was a cramped 2-bedroom unit in a complex that had seen better days, with peeling paint on the exterior walls and a parking lot full of potholes that had been patched and repatched over the years. Derek was loading boxes into the truck bed when I arrived, his movements efficient despite the cold. He wore new work boots that caught my attention, immediately expensive-looking leather with steel toes that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. His jacket looked new too, a heavy-duty winter coat with a construction company logo I didn't recognize embroidered on the chest. "Nice boots," I commented casually as I handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "Must be nice to have good gear for job hunting." Derek's response was quick, maybe too quick. "Oh, these got them on clearance at the outlet mall. Figured I'd need good boots for interviews, gotta look professional." But there was something in his tone that didn't quite ring true. A slight defensiveness, that made me pay closer attention as the morning progressed. Amanda emerged from the apartment building carrying a box marked kitchen stuff. In her neat handwriting, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the excitement. She'd done something new with her hair highlights that definitely hadn't been there at Christmas dinner, and her nails were freshly manicured in a deep, red color that screamed expensive salon treatment. "Frederick," she called out, setting the box down to give me another one of those tight hugs that had become her signature move since Christmas. "I can't believe we're actually doing this. The kids are so excited they couldn't sleep last night. Sophie keeps talking about having her own bathroom, and Marcus is thrilled about being closer to the good comic book store downtown." The kids were indeed excited, buzzing around the moving process like caffeinated bees. Sophie had already packed her stuffed animals in a special box that she insisted on carrying herself, while Marcus supervised the loading of his gaming setup with the intensity of a museum curator handling priceless artifacts. Their enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, which made the whole situation more complicated than I wanted it to be. Amanda's friends pitched in with the kind of energy that suggested they were genuinely happy for her family's good fortune. Jessica, her best friend since college, kept commenting on how lucky Amanda was to have such a generous brother, how this was exactly the kind of break they needed to get back on their feet. Tom and Linda from Derek's old construction crew helped move the heavier furniture, joking about how Derek was moving up in the world while they were all still scrambling for winter work. As we loaded the couch into the truck, I overheard Jessica asking Amanda about her new highlights. "Aren't they gorgeous?" Amanda replied, running her fingers through her hair. "I figured I deserved a little something nice after everything we've been through. Besides, I wanted to look good for job interviews once we get settled." But it was Derek's phone conversation that really caught my attention. While we were wrestling his toolbox into the truck bed, his phone rang. He stepped away from the group to answer it, but the winter air carried his voice clearly to where I was standing. "Yeah, I know the official start date isn't until next Monday, but I wanted to make sure I had all the paperwork ready." He was saying, his voice carrying a confidence that contradicted everything he'd told us about being unemployed. "The management position comes with the truck and the tool allowance, right? And the health insurance kicks in immediately." My blood went cold as I processed what I was hearing. Derek was talking about a job that was clearly already secured, not desperately searching for work like he'd claimed. The management position he mentioned sounded significant, not the kind of temporary labor he'd described being forced to accept. And the benefits he was discussing suggested this was a substantial opportunity, not the scraping by desperation they'd painted at Christmas dinner. Derek noticed me nearby and quickly ended the call, but the damage was done. "Work stuff," he said with a casual shrug that didn't match the guilty expression in his eyes. "Gotta follow up on every lead, you know." But I was already putting together the pieces of a much bigger picture. The expensive boots and jacket, Amanda's salon fresh appearance, the casual mention of job interviews that didn't align with their supposed desperation, and now Derek's revealing phone conversation all pointed to a level of financial stability that contradicted everything they'd told my family. The drive to my condo took 20 minutes through downtown traffic past the coffee shops and boutiques that made the neighborhood so desirable. The building itself was a converted warehouse from the 1920s, with original brick walls and modern amenities that justified the premium rent in this part of the city. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was filled with excited chatter from Sophie and Marcus about their new view, while Amanda and Derek exchanged looks that I was beginning to interpret differently. Setting up in the condo revealed even more inconsistencies in their story. Amanda immediately began talking about color schemes for redecorating, mentioning specific paint colors and furniture pieces with the authority of someone who'd been planning this move for longer than a week. Derek started measuring spaces with a tape measure he'd brought along, making notes about where they could add shelving and storage solutions. "We don't want to impose too much," Amanda said as she examined the kitchen cabinets. "But would it be okay if we replace some of these handles? They're beautiful, but not really our style." The request struck me as odd for people who were supposedly grateful for temporary shelter, but I smiled and told them to make whatever changes would help them feel at home watching, as their expressions shifted from asking permission to making assumptions about their right to modify my property. That evening, after everyone else had gone home and the family was settling into their first night in the condo, Derek stepped out onto the balcony to take another phone call. I was in the kitchen helping Amanda organize dishes when his voice drifted through the sliding glass door clearer than he probably realized. "Trust me, this is perfect," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Free rent for as long as we want, and the brother's such a pushover, he's actually encouraging us to think of it as permanent. We'll save enough in 6 months to cover that Caribbean cruise and still have money left over for the down payment on the truck I want." My hands stilled on the dish I was drying as the full scope of their deception became clear. This wasn't about Derek losing his job or facing eviction. This was a calculated plan to exploit my generosity for their own financial gain, with the added goal of saving money for luxury purchases they couldn't otherwise afford. Amanda was humming contentedly as she arranged her coffee mugs in what had been my cabinet space, completely unaware that I'd overheard her husband's casual admission of their fraud. The kids were in the living room arguing good-naturedly over what to watch on the television, their voices carrying the kind of happiness that comes from children who believe their parents have solved all their problems. As I watched my sister's family settling into my home, under completely false pretenses, I felt the last traces of guilt about my own deception evaporate. They weren't victims of circumstance seeking temporary help from family. They were con artists who saw my kindness as weakness to be exploited, my home as a resource to be claimed, and my trust as foolishness to be mocked. The game had begun in earnest, but they had no idea that they weren't the only ones who knew how to lie. The next few days passed with me playing the part of the doting brother while conducting my own private investigation into Amanda and Derek's history. What I discovered was far worse than I'd imagined: a pattern of manipulation and exploitation that stretched back years and involved multiple victims who'd been too embarrassed or too kind to expose their schemes. It started with a casual phone call to my cousin Jake, who lived about 3 hours north in Salem. We'd always gotten along well, but we didn't talk often, so when I mentioned that Amanda and Derek were staying with me temporarily due to financial hardship, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Frederick," Jake said finally, his voice careful in the way people sound when they're trying to figure out how much they should reveal. "How much do you actually know about their situation?" That question opened a floodgate of information that made my stomach churn with anger and disgust. Jake told me about how Amanda and Derek had stayed in his garage apartment for 8 months, 2 years earlier supposedly, while Derek looked for steady work after being laid off from a logging operation. They'd promised it would be temporary just until they got back on their feet, but had settled in like permanent residents. Amanda redecorated the whole space. Jake explained, his voice carrying the weight of old frustration. New curtains painted the walls, even hung family photos like they owned the place. Derek started inviting his buddies over for poker nights without asking, and they were ordering takeout constantly while claiming they couldn't afford groceries. The breaking point had come when Jake discovered that Derek had been working a cash under-the-table demolition job for months while still claiming unemployment benefits and accepting charity from Jake's family. They'd been saving every penny they earned while living rent-free, planning to use the money for a new motorcycle Derek wanted. When I confronted them about it, Amanda cried and said they were just trying to get ahead so they could move out and not be a burden anymore. Jake continued, "She made me feel guilty for questioning their honesty, like I was the bad guy for not trusting family. But then I found out Derek had already bought the motorcycle and was keeping it at his friend's house so I wouldn't see it. They'd left Jake's place in the middle of the night after he'd given them a 30-day notice to move out, taking several of his tools and a television they claimed Amanda's kids had gotten attached to. Jake had never pursued legal action because he didn't want to create family drama, but he'd been hurt and angry about the betrayal of his trust. Armed with this information, I started making more phone calls. Derek's brother Paul initially seemed reluctant to talk, but eventually admitted that Amanda and Derek had borrowed $5,000 from him the previous year for what they claimed was an emergency medical expense for Sophie. Paul had later discovered through social media posts that the money had actually funded a week-long vacation to Las Vegas, complete with expensive restaurant meals and show tickets. The thing that really got to me, Paul said, was that they posted all these photos of them having this amazing time staying in nice hotels and eating at steakhouses while I was working overtime to cover the money I'd lent them. When I asked about it, Amanda said the trip was a gift from Derek's boss as a bonus. But she couldn't explain why they'd needed to borrow money for Sophie's medical bills if Derek was getting bonuses from work. The pattern was becoming depressingly clear. Amanda and Derek had perfected a system of financial manipulation that relied on people's natural desire to help family members in genuine need. They would create elaborate stories of hardship and crisis, accept help with tears and gratitude, then exploit that generosity far beyond what they'd originally asked for. My investigation expanded to their social media presence, which told a very different story than their claims of poverty and desperation. Amanda's Facebook page was filled with photos from expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, and shopping hauls from upscale boutiques. Derek's Instagram showed off fishing trips with high-end gear hunting expeditions with expensive equipment and photos of him working construction projects that looked far too steady and well paid for someone who was supposedly unemployed. The most damning evidence came from Amanda's own posts about their living situation. Just 3 weeks before Christmas, she'd shared a photo of their apartment with a caption about how grateful she was for their cozy little home and how they were exactly where they needed to be right now. There was no mention of eviction notices or financial hardship, just contentment with their current situation. I also discovered that Derek's construction company hadn't laid him off at all. A quick search of public records showed that he'd voluntarily left his previous job to take a management position with a different company, a move that came with a significant salary increase and better benefits. The timing aligned perfectly with their decision to manipulate their way into my condo, suggesting that they'd seen this career advancement as an opportunity to save even more money by eliminating their rent payments entirely. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was that this wasn't just about money. Amanda had been bragging to her friends about how easy it was to manipulate me, sharing screenshots of our text conversations with commentary about my soft heart and how she could wrap Frederick around her finger whenever she needed something. The casual cruelty of her attitude, the way she mocked my genuine concern for my family's welfare, made me realize that I wasn't just dealing with financial desperation, but with people who genuinely enjoyed taking advantage of others. Even more troubling was the involvement of my parents in these schemes. Further investigation revealed that Mom and Dad had been aware of at least some of Amanda's previous manipulations, but had chosen to look the other way, because they believed family should support family regardless of circumstances. They'd actually encouraged Amanda to ask me for help with housing, knowing full well that she and Derek had the means to support themselves. The evening I spent going through all this evidence was one of the angriest of my life. Sitting in my apartment surrounded by printed screenshots and notes from phone conversations, I felt a combination of rage and betrayal that made my chest tight with emotion. These weren't just lies told in desperation. They were calculated deceptions designed to exploit my love for my family and my desire to help people in need. But the anger gradually transformed into something colder and more focused. If Amanda and Derek wanted to play games with people's generosity, if they thought they could build their financial future on lies and manipulation, then they were about to learn what it felt like to be on the receiving end of deception. I pulled out my laptop and began researching real estate agents' property law and the legal requirements for selling a condominium with tenants in residence. If they thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers, they were about to discover that I'd been thinking several moves ahead all along. The game was far from over and I was done being the victim. The next phase of my plan required careful timing and meticulous attention to legal details. I spent the following week consulting with professionals who could help me navigate the complex process of selling a property while maintaining the appearance of supporting my family's housing needs. Every conversation I had was calculated to advance my strategy while keeping Amanda and Derek completely unaware of what was coming. My first stop was the law office of Patricia Morrison, a real estate attorney whose reputation for handling complex property transactions was exactly what I needed. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing as I explained my situation. I was careful to present the facts without revealing my full intentions, describing the sale as a necessary financial move rather than an act of revenge. "So you want to sell the condominium while your sister's family is living there as tenants?" Patricia summarized, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Do you have a formal lease agreement with them?" "No," I admitted. "It's a family arrangement. They're staying there temporarily while they get back on their feet financially." Patricia's eyebrows raised slightly. "That complicates things, but it doesn't make the sale impossible. Since there's no formal lease, you'll need to provide them with proper notice according to state law. In this jurisdiction, that means 30 days written notice of your intent to sell and their requirement to vacate." She explained the legal process in detail, emphasizing that everything had to be documented properly to avoid potential lawsuits or claims that I'd acted in bad faith. The timing would be crucial. I needed to have the property listed and under contract before serving the eviction notice, but I couldn't complete the sale without giving them adequate time to move out. "The key," Patricia explained, "is to ensure that every step you take is completely legal and properly documented. Family disputes over property can get very messy very quickly, so you want to be absolutely certain that you're protected from any claims of improper dealing." My next appointment was with Marcus Chen, a real estate agent who specialized in high-end urban properties. Marcus was recommended by a colleague at work, and his track record of quick sales in competitive markets was exactly what I needed for my timeline to work properly. His office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel with expensive modern furniture that suggested he was very good at his job. "This is a seller's market for properties like yours," Marcus explained as he reviewed the photographs and specifications of my condo. "Downtown units with good views and modern amenities are in high demand. I think we can list this significantly above what you paid for it 3 years ago." He walked me through comparable sales in the building and surrounding area, showing me data that suggested my investment had appreciated considerably since I'd bought it. The numbers were better than I'd hoped, which meant the financial impact of the sale would more than compensate for any short-term inconvenience of finding new housing for myself. "How quickly can we move on this?" I asked. "I need the property sold within the next 60 to 90 days. Marcus smiled with the confidence of someone who'd handled dozens of similar transactions. "With the right pricing strategy, we could have offers within a week of listing. The key is generating multiple offers to drive up the final price. I'd recommend staging the property to show it its best advantage." That presented a logistical challenge, since Amanda's family was currently living in the space with all their belongings. But Marcus had solutions for that too, suggesting that we schedule showings during times when the family would be out, and that we position their temporary residence as a selling point rather than an obstacle. "We can market it as a lived-in space that shows how comfortable and functional the layout is for family living," he suggested. "Buyers like to see homes that feel warm and welcoming rather than sterile and empty." While I was setting up the legal and real estate framework for the sale, Amanda was settling into the condo with increasing levels of entitlement that made my blood boil every time I visited. Her behavior had shifted from grateful temporary guest to demanding permanent resident with shocking speed, as if she'd forgotten entirely that the property belonged to me. During one visit, I found her measuring the master bedroom for new furniture, explaining that the current bedroom set didn't really fit their style and needs. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not really asking for permission, but Derek and I were thinking about getting a king-size bed to replace that queen you have in there. And we really need a bigger dresser for all our clothes. Derek had made himself equally at home, converting the spare bedroom into what he called his workshop, complete with tools and equipment that had definitely not been part of their desperate financial situation they described at Christmas. He'd also taken it upon himself to improve the balcony by adding outdoor furniture and a gas grill that he'd somehow acquired despite their supposed poverty. This space has so much potential, Derek told me as he showed off his modifications. Amanda and I were thinking we could enclose part of the balcony to create a little office space, maybe add some built-in storage. It would really maximize the square footage. The casual assumption that they would be making permanent modifications to my property was staggering, but I maintained my supportive brother act perfectly. That sounds like a great idea, I told him. You should definitely make the space work for your family's needs. What made their behavior even more infuriating was the way they'd started treating me like a landlord rather than a family member doing them a favor. Amanda presented me with a list of maintenance issues that needed to be addressed, including replacing the bathroom faucets, updating the kitchen appliances, and having the hardwood floors professionally refinished. I know these things cost money, she said with the tone of someone who was being very reasonable, but if we're going to be living here long term, it makes sense to keep everything in good condition. Besides, these improvements will increase the property value, so it's really an investment for you. The fact that she was now explicitly talking about living there long term while simultaneously demanding that I fund expensive renovations was almost too much to bear. But I gritted my teeth and agreed to everything, knowing that each modification they made was actually increasing the value of the property I was about to sell out from under them. Absolutely, I told her. Let's make sure this place is perfect for your family. Get quotes for whatever work you think needs to be done, and we'll make it happen. Amanda's face lit up with delight at my response, and she immediately began making phone calls to contractors and interior designers. Within days, the condo was filled with people measuring and estimating costs for projects that ranged from purely cosmetic to major structural changes. Derek got caught up in the renovation excitement as well, talking about replacing all the windows, upgrading the electrical system, and even exploring the possibility of combining my unit with the adjacent one to create a larger living space. The scope of their plans grew daily, as if they were designing their dream home, rather than temporarily occupying someone else's property. This could be really amazing, Derek told me as he showed me architectural sketches he'd commissioned from a friend who worked in construction. Amanda's always wanted a bigger kitchen, and if we knock out this wall here, we could create this incredible open-concept living space. I nodded enthusiastically and encouraged him to pursue whatever changes would make them happy, all while knowing that none of these improvements would benefit them personally. Every dollar they convinced me to spend on the condo was money that would increase my profit when I sold it to strangers who would appreciate their design choices. The irony was delicious in the cruelest possible way. Amanda and Derek were essentially paying for the renovations of a property they were about to lose, using my money to improve an investment that would soon belong to someone else entirely. Their greed and sense of entitlement were making my revenge more profitable than I'd originally planned. As February progressed and their renovation plans became more elaborate, I received the call from Marcus that I'd been waiting for. "We've got the property ready to list," he told me. "The market conditions are perfect, and I think we're going to see some serious interest from buyers." The listing would go live the following Monday, which meant I had exactly 72 hours to finalize my legal preparations and get ready to spring the trap that Amanda and Derek had unknowingly helped me set. They thought they were building their future. Instead, they were constructing their own downfall with every improvement they made to what they still believed was their new permanent home. The third weekend of February brought the culmination of Amanda's transformation from grateful sister to entitled homeowner in the most spectacular way imaginable. She'd been planning what she called a housewarming party, for weeks treating it like the social event of the season and inviting everyone they knew to celebrate their new home and Derek's amazing new job that had made their fresh start possible. The guest list had grown beyond anything reasonable for the space, with Amanda inviting extended family, Derek's work crew, her college friends' neighbors from their old apartment complex, and even people from Sophie and Marcus's new schools. What had started as a casual dinner party had evolved into a full-scale celebration with catered food, professional decorations, and enough alcohol to stock a small bar. "I want everyone to see how well we're doing," Amanda told me when she called to make sure I'd be there early to help set up. "After everything we've been through, it feels good to have something to celebrate. Plus, I want people to see what an amazing brother I have who made this all possible." The manipulation in that last sentence was breathtaking in its casual cruelty. Even as she was planning to publicly claim my property as her own, she was still positioning herself as the beneficiary of my generosity rather than acknowledging the deception that had made the whole situation possible. Saturday afternoon found me standing in my own living room watching Amanda direct the setup of her party like a master event coordinator. She'd hired actual caterers, a woman named Elena and her assistant, who were arranging elaborate appetizer displays on rented serving tables. The decorations were professionally done with string lights draped artfully around the room and fresh flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Doesn't this look amazing?" Amanda asked, gesturing around the room with obvious pride. Elena suggested the lighting scheme, and Derek's friend Jimmy helped us move all the furniture to create better flow for mingling. Derek was in his element as host, setting up the bar area with an array of top-shelf liquor that contradicted everything about their supposed financial struggles. He'd bought new clothes for the occasion, a button-down shirt and khakis, that made him look more successful businessman than unemployed construction worker seeking family charity. "Frederick," he called out when he saw me examining the bar setup. "Come try this bourbon I picked up. It's from a small distillery in Kentucky, really smooth stuff. I figured since we're celebrating, we should do it right." The kids were dressed in new outfits too. Sophie in a blue dress with matching shoes, and Marcus in khakis and a polo shirt that made him look like a miniature version of his father. They were practically vibrating with excitement as they helped arrange chairs and tested the sound system Derek had rented for background music. As guests began arriving around 6 o'clock, I positioned myself where I could observe the evening unfold while maintaining my role as the supportive brother. Uncle Bill and Aunt Sarah were among the first to arrive, bringing a bottle of wine and expressions of amazement at how beautifully Amanda had decorated her new home. Jake drove down from Salem with his wife Susan, and I watched his face carefully as Amanda gave them the grand tour of what she repeatedly referred to as their place. Jake's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught him shooting me meaningful looks when Amanda wasn't watching, clearly recognizing the pattern from his own experience with their manipulation. Derek's work crew arrived in force, a group of rough-around-the-edges guys who seemed genuinely happy for Derek's apparent good fortune. They talked about his promotion to site supervisor, his new company truck, and the housing allowance that came with his management position, all details that Amanda and Derek had somehow forgotten to mention during their Christmas sob story. "Man, Derek, you really landed on your feet with this new gig," said a burly man named Tommy, who seemed to be Derek's closest friend at work. "Management position benefits, and your family gets to live in this sweet setup. That's what I call a win-win situation." Amanda's friends from college were equally impressed, and their conversations revealed details about Amanda and Derek's lifestyle that made my jaw clench with suppressed anger. Jessica, Amanda's maid of honor from their wedding, kept commenting on Amanda's recent salon treatments, her new wardrobe, and the expensive skincare products in the bathroom. "I love what you've done with this place," Jessica told Amanda as they stood near the kitchen, wine glasses in hand. It's so much nicer than your old apartment. And that view, you must feel so lucky to have family who can help you live somewhere this nice. Oh, Frederick's been amazing, Amanda replied, loud enough to ensure I could hear her. He insisted we think of this as our permanent home, not just temporary. He said family should take care of each other, and he wanted to make sure the kids had stability and security. The casual rewriting of history was stunning. In Amanda's version of events, I'd been the one pushing for permanency, insisting they stay indefinitely rather than them manipulating their way into free housing with no intention of leaving. She was painting herself as the reluctant recipient of overwhelming generosity rather than the architect of an elaborate con game. But it was Derek's conversation with his new boss that pushed me past the point of no return. Richard Morrison, the owner of Morrison Construction, had arrived with his wife around 8 o'clock, and Derek immediately launched into introductions that made my role in the evening clear. Richard, I want you to meet my brother-in-law, Frederick. Derek set his arm around my shoulders in a gesture of fake camaraderie. He's the one I was telling you about, the guy who gave us this place to live. Real family man, always putting others first. Richard shook my hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested he was genuinely impressed by what he perceived as my generosity. Derek told me about your situation, he said. It's wonderful that you stepped up to help when they needed it. That's the kind of family values we appreciate in our company. Actually, Derek continued, warming to his theme. Frederick here insisted we stop thinking about this as temporary. He wants us to treat this as our home, make whatever changes we need to make it perfect for our family. That's the kind of brother-in-law everyone should have. Amanda joined the conversation at that moment, wine making her more talkative and less careful about her words. Oh, Richard, you should have seen Derek when Frederick offered this place. He actually tried to turn it down at first because he's so proud, but Frederick wouldn't take no for an answer. He said family doesn't let family struggle when they have the means to help. The lies were flowing so smoothly, so confidently, that I realized they'd probably told this story dozens of times already, refining it with each telling until it sounded completely natural and believable. In their version, I was the insistent benefactor who'd forced my generosity on reluctant recipients rather than the Mark who'd been manipulated into providing exactly what they wanted. We're thinking about putting in hardwood floors throughout the whole place. Amanda continued, gesturing toward the bedrooms. Frederick thinks it'll be a good investment. And since this is our home now, we want everything to be perfect. We're also looking at knocking out the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create more of an open concept. Richard nodded approvingly. Sounds like you've got long-term plans. That's smart thinking, investing in improvements that'll benefit everyone. Oh, absolutely, Derek agreed. We're not going anywhere. This is home now. Frederick made that very clear when he offered the place. He said he wanted the kids to have stability, to know they could count on family. As I listened to them casually discuss their permanent occupation of my property, their elaborate renovation plans, and their complete certainty that I would continue funding their lifestyle indefinitely, I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about fundamental respect and honesty between family members. They weren't grateful temporary guests who'd overstayed their welcome. They were con artists who'd successfully executed a long-term financial scam and were now publicly celebrating their victory over what they clearly considered my stupidity and weakness. The party continued around me, but I was no longer really present in the moment. Instead, I was thinking about the paperwork in my car, the listing that would go live Monday morning, and the 30-day notice that I'd be serving within the week. They wanted to celebrate their new home and their successful manipulation of their generous brother, Perfect. Let them enjoy it while it lasted. Amanda found me later in the evening after most of the guests had moved on to the balcony, where Derek was grilling late-night snacks and showing off the view of the city lights. She was slightly unsteady from wine and emotion, her cheeks flushed with happiness and alcohol. "Frederick," she said, taking my hands in hers, "I don't think I can ever thank you enough for what you've done for us. This party, this home, this chance for Derek to really succeed in his career, none of it would be possible without you. You've changed our whole family's future." She was right about that, just not in the way she imagined. I had indeed changed their family's future, but the change was going to come as a shock that would teach them lessons about manipulation, greed, and the consequences of treating family as marks in a confidence game. "I'm just happy you're all settled and comfortable," I told her, meaning every word in ways she couldn't begin to understand. "Family should take care of each other. We're going to make you so proud," Amanda continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Derek's already talking about what kind of business he wants to start once he's saved enough from this management position. And with living expenses taken care of, we can actually start planning for the kids' college funds, maybe take some real family vacations." The future she was describing was built entirely on the assumption that I would continue providing free housing indefinitely while they saved money and built wealth using my generosity as their foundation. It was a future where they prospered through deception, while I remained their unwitting benefactor, too kind and too stupid to recognize that I was being used. That future was about to come to an abrupt and shocking end, but for tonight, I let her dream and plan and celebrate. Monday morning would bring the beginning of their education about what happened when you mistake someone's kindness for weakness, and when you confuse temporary generosity with permanent entitlement. The point of no return had been crossed not by me, but by them in front of dozens of witnesses who'd heard them claim permanent ownership of property that belonged to me. They'd made their choice publicly and confidently, never suspecting that their victim had been planning their comeuppance all along. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of persistent February rain that made everything look cold and unwelcoming. I sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee, watching the clock and waiting for Marcus Chen to call with confirmation that my condo listing had gone live on all the major real estate websites. The timing of everything depended on this first domino falling exactly when it was supposed to. At 9:15, my phone buzzed with Marcus's text message, "Listed and already getting inquiries. This is going to move fast." Phase 1 was complete. My property was officially on the market with professional photographs that showcased all the improvements Amanda and Derek had made over the past month. The irony was perfect. Their renovation work was helping to market the home they thought they owned to buyers who would soon displace them. The next call went to Patricia Morrison's office to confirm that all the legal paperwork was prepared and ready for immediate execution. Her assistant, a crisp-voiced woman named Margaret, assured me that the 30-day notice had been prepared according to state law requirements and could be served anytime after noon. "Mrs. Morrison wanted me to remind you that once you serve that notice, there's no going back," Margaret said. "The legal process will be in motion, and the 30-day clock will start, regardless of any family considerations." "I understand," I told her. "I'm ready to proceed." The beauty of my timing was that Amanda and Derek had left that morning for what they called a house hunting adventure to find a suitable place for Derek's parents to live. Apparently, their success in securing free housing for themselves had inspired them to expand their operation, and they were looking for a rental property where they could install Derek's elderly parents as tenants, while Derek covered the rent as part of his family support plan. Derek had been excited about this new scheme when he'd explained it to me over the weekend. "Dad's been talking about moving closer to us, and with my new management salary, I can afford to help out with his housing costs," he'd said. "We found this great place about 10 minutes from here, perfect for seniors, and the landlord is willing to work with us on the lease terms." What Derek hadn't mentioned, but what I'd figured out through careful questioning, was that his parents were perfectly capable of managing their own housing costs. This was another manipulation, another way to present himself as the generous family man while actually moving his parents closer so they could provide free childcare and household help while Amanda pursued what she'd started calling her interior design business. They'd left around 10:30 with Derek's parents in tow, planning to spend the day looking at apartments and taking Robert and Susan Morrison out for lunch to celebrate their impending move. The kids were at school, which meant the condo would be empty until at least 3 o'clock, giving me a window of several hours to handle what needed to be done. I parked in the visitor space at 11:45 and sat in my car for 15 minutes, watching the building entrance and making sure Amanda and Derek hadn't returned early. My hands were steady as I gathered the manila envelope containing the legal notice, but my heart was beating faster than normal, as I realized that this was the moment when my months of planning would finally become reality. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual, and the hallway seemed unnaturally quiet as I walked to what had been my front door, but was now effectively Amanda and Derek's residence. I had my key, of course, but I knocked first out of courtesy and to make absolutely certain the place was empty. No answer. I used my key and stepped inside. The transformation of my condo over the past month was remarkable and infuriating in equal measure. Amanda had completely redecorated the living room with new furniture, artwork, and accessories that reflected her taste rather than mine. Family photographs covered the mantelpiece and side tables, showing Derek's extended family vacation trips and happy moments that painted the picture of a family that had successfully landed on their feet. Derek's presence was equally evident throughout the space. His tools and equipment had spread beyond the spare bedroom he'd claimed as a workshop, with construction supplies and renovation materials stacked in the hallway and against the walls. The balcony bore no resemblance to the simple outdoor space I'd enjoyed. It was now an elaborate outdoor room, with expensive furniture, decorative plants, and the gas grill Derek had installed without asking permission. I walked through each room methodically, taking photographs with my phone to document the extent of their modifications and improvements. Every change they'd made, every dollar they'd convinced me to spend on upgrades, every personal touch they'd added to make the space their own. All of it would soon belong to whoever bought the property from me. In the master bedroom, Amanda's presence was overwhelming. Her clothes filled the walk-in closet completely, with Derek's wardrobe taking up the smaller bedroom closet. The bathroom counter was covered with expensive cosmetics and skincare products, the kind of luxury items that people experiencing genuine financial hardship couldn't afford. Their assumption of permanent residence was evident in every detail, from the way they'd arranged the furniture to the personal items scattered throughout the space. But it was the spare bedroom that truly revealed the scope of their deception. Derek's temporary workspace was actually a fully equipped home office and workshop with professional-grade tools, a computer setup, and filing cabinets full of what appeared to be business documents. This wasn't the desperate attempt of an unemployed man to stay busy. This was the workspace of someone planning for long-term success and prosperity. I found the folder marked Morrison Construction Projects and couldn't resist taking a quick look. The documents inside revealed that Derek's new job was even more substantial than I'd realized. His salary as a site supervisor was nearly double what he'd been making at his previous job, with bonuses and benefits that put him firmly in the middle-class comfort zone. The paperwork also showed that his promotion had been planned for months, contradicting their Christmas story about unexpected unemployment and financial crisis. At exactly 12:30, I placed the legal notice on the kitchen counter where they couldn't miss it, positioned it next to a handwritten note I'd prepared. Amanda and Derek. I hope you understand that this decision comes from legal and financial necessity, not from any lack of love for our family. The 30-day notice period begins today, and I'll be happy to help with your transition in any way I can. Please call me when you get home so we can discuss the timeline and logistics. Frederick. The note was carefully crafted to sound reluctant and apologetic rather than calculated and vengeful. Patricia Morrison had advised me that maintaining the appearance of regret about the necessity of eviction would be important if Amanda and Derek tried to challenge the sale or claim that I'd acted in bad faith. I locked the door behind me and drove straight to my office where I tried to focus on work while waiting for the inevitable phone calls. Marcus had texted twice more with updates about buyer interest and potential showing appointments, but I'd asked him to delay any actual showings until after I'd served the notice and dealt with my family's initial reaction. The first call came at 3:47 in the afternoon. Amanda's name appeared on my caller ID and I let it ring 4 times before answering, wanting to sound surprised rather than expectant. Frederick. Amanda's voice was high and strained with an edge of panic that hadn't been there since their original Christmas performance. What is this notice? What do you mean you're selling the condo? I thought we agreed this was our home now. Amanda. I'm so sorry, I said, putting genuine regret into my voice. I know this is terrible timing, but my financial situation has changed. I need to liquidate some assets, and the condo is my biggest investment. The real estate market is really strong right now, and my financial advisor says this is the right time to sell. But where are we supposed to go? She asked, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine distress. Derek's parents are moving here next week. We've made plans, we've invested money in improvements. I know, and I feel terrible about the timing, I continued. That's why I wanted to give you as much notice as possible. 30 days should be enough time to find something else, and I'll help with the security deposit and moving costs. Maybe you can find a place that's even better for your family's needs. Frederick, you don't understand, Amanda said, her tone shifting from panic to pleading. We can't just move. This is our home now. You said so yourself. You encouraged us to make changes, to think of this as permanent. I said you could make changes to be comfortable while you were staying here, I corrected gently. I never said it was permanent. This was always intended to be temporary until you got back on your feet, and it sounds like Derek's new job has accomplished exactly that. There was a long pause during which I could hear Derek's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out his words. When Amanda came back on the line, her tone had changed again, this time to anger. This is ridiculous, she said flatly. You can't just decide to sell without warning us. We have rights. We've been living here for over a month, and we've put thousands of dollars into improvements. Amanda. I understand you're upset, but I've followed all the legal requirements for notice, I said, maintaining my patient tone. I consulted with an attorney to make sure everything was done properly. The notice gives you exactly what the law requires. What attorney? Derek's voice came on the line, apparently having taken the phone from Amanda. Since when do you need an attorney to kick out family? This is insane, Frederick. We trusted you. We believed you when you said this could be our permanent home. Derek. I'm sorry you interpreted my offer that way, but I never made any promises about permanency, I replied. I offered temporary housing while you got back on your feet, and that's exactly what I provided. Your new job means you're back on your feet, so the temporary arrangement has served its purpose. This is about money, isn't it? Derek continued, his voice getting louder. You've seen how much we've improved this place, and now you want to cash in on our work. You're going to sell it for a profit using improvements we paid for. The accusation was so close to the truth that I almost laughed, but I kept my voice steady and reasonable. Derek, this is about my financial needs, not about profiting from your improvements. I appreciate everything you've done to make the place more comfortable, but that was always for your benefit, not mine. The call ended abruptly, and I sat back in my office chair with a feeling of satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. The first domino had fallen, and now I could only wait to see how quickly the rest would follow. Over the next 2 hours, my phone rang constantly. Amanda called 6 more times, Derek called 4 times, and my mother called twice, all with variations on the same themes: disbelief, anger, accusations of betrayal, and demands that I reconsider my decision. Each conversation followed a similar pattern, with them expressing shock that I would destroy our family over money, and me calmly explaining that this was a business decision based on financial necessity. The most revealing call came from my father around 6 o'clock. Unlike the others, Dad's tone was calculating, rather than emotional, suggesting that he understood exactly what was happening and was trying to find a way to manipulate me back into compliance. "Son," he said, using the tone he'd employed when I was a child and had disappointed him, "I think you need to really consider the consequences of what you're doing here. Amanda and Derek have made this place their home. They've invested their money and their future in that property. You can't just pull the rug out from under them because you've decided you want more money." "Dad, this isn't about wanting more money," I replied. "This is about needing to make smart financial decisions. The real estate market won't stay this strong forever, and I need to take advantage of current conditions." "That's a load of bull, and you know it." Dad said, his facade of patience cracking. "This is about you being selfish and greedy. Your sister's family needs stability, and you promised them they could stay as long as they needed." "I never promised permanency," I said firmly. "I offered temporary help, and that's what I provided." "Well, I hope you're happy with yourself," Dad concluded, "because you're about to learn what it feels like to lose your family over money." After that call ended, I turned off my phone and drove home through the rainy February evening, feeling lighter than I had in months. The trap had been sprung, the legal process was in motion, and Amanda and Derek were finally experiencing the consequences of treating family generosity as entitlement to be exploited. They had 30 days to find new housing, pack their belongings, and face the reality of supporting themselves without manipulating family members into providing free resources. Meanwhile, I had 30 days to complete the sale of my property and start the next chapter of my life free from people who mistook kindness for weakness and love for stupidity. The 78 missed calls that would follow over the next month would tell the rest of the story, but the ending had already been written the moment they decided to treat my generosity as their birthright. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, watching the sun rise over the Cascade Mountains and feeling a sense of peace that had been absent from my life for longer than I cared to admit. The two-bedroom place wasn't as fancy as my old condo, but it was mine in a way that felt different from any property I'd owned before. This space represented freedom, independence, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from finally learning to set boundaries with people who mistake kindness for weakness. The sale of the condo had closed exactly 31 days after I'd served Amanda and Derek with their eviction notice, and the final numbers exceeded even Marcus Chen's optimistic projections. The improvements they'd convinced me to fund, combined with the strong downtown real estate market, resulted in a profit that more than covered my moving expenses and provided a substantial down payment for my new life in a city where nobody knew my history or expected me to be the family pushover. My phone sat on the kitchen counter displaying the call log that had become a fascinating study in human psychology over the past 4 months. 78 missed calls, starting with frantic desperation and evolving through anger bargaining and eventually something that might have been acceptance. The progression told the story of a family learning that their manipulation tactics had finally met someone who refused to be controlled by guilt obligation or the supposed sanctity of family relationships. The first 20 calls had come in the immediate aftermath of my notice with Amanda and Derek cycling through every emotional manipulation technique in their arsenal. Tears, rage, threats of legal action, claims that I was destroying the children's stability, accusations that I cared more about money than family, all delivered with the kind of dramatic intensity that had worked so effectively in the past. Calls 21 through 45 had involved other family members as Amanda and Derek recruited flying monkeys to pressure me into changing my mind. Mom called to inform me that I was breaking Amanda's heart and traumatizing the children. Dad called to accuse me of being selfish and greedy. Even Grandma Helen called, her voice shaking with disappointment as she told me that my behavior was destroying the family's Christmas memories and making everyone question what kind of person I really was. But the most interesting calls were numbers 46 through 60, when the desperation became real rather than performative. Derek had apparently discovered that finding family-sized housing in their price range was more challenging than they'd expected, especially when they couldn't use someone else's generosity as a financial foundation. Amanda called to ask if I would consider letting them stay an extra month if they paid rent. Then another call, asking if I would loan them money for a security deposit. Then a third call, wondering if I might consider selling the condo to them at below market value. The final 18 calls represented capitulation and the beginning of what might eventually become genuine communication. Derek called to apologize for some of the things he'd said during the angry phase, admitting that they'd taken my generosity for granted and made assumptions about my intentions that weren't fair. Amanda called to thank me for forcing them to face their financial reality and stop depending on family manipulation to solve their problems. But it was call number 72 that had given me the most satisfaction. Amanda's voice was different, calmer and more mature than I'd heard in years, as she called to tell me that Derek's new job was actually going really well, and that they'd found a nice 3-bedroom rental house in a family-friendly neighborhood, about 20 minutes from downtown. The funny thing is, Amanda had said, Derek's actually making enough money that we can afford our own place comfortably without needing help from anyone. I think we got so used to taking shortcuts and depending on family that we forgot we could actually take care of ourselves. She'd also mentioned that Derek had turned down several side opportunities that would have involved borrowing money from family members or asking for favors that went beyond reasonable bounds. We decided we want to build our success on our own work, not on manipulating people who care about us, she'd said. It feels better this way, more honest. Call number 76 had come from Derek himself, with an update that surprised me more than anything else in this entire story. He'd been promoted again at Morrison Construction this time to regional supervisor based entirely on his work performance and leadership abilities rather than his skill at emotional manipulation. I never realized how much energy I was putting into working the angles and finding people to help us out, Derek had told me. When I stopped focusing on that stuff and just concentrated on doing good work, everything started falling into place naturally. Richard says I'm the best site supervisor he's hired in 10 years. The children, according to Amanda's reports, had adjusted to their new living situation better than expected. Sophie loved having her own bedroom in their rental house, and Marcus had discovered that taking the school bus to his new school was actually more fun than being driven. They'd even started talking about how proud they were that their parents were supporting the family through honest work rather than depending on Uncle Frederick's help. Call number 77 had been the most difficult one to receive, even though I'd been expecting it for months. Mom's voice was subdued as she called to apologize for her role in encouraging Amanda's manipulation and for failing to recognize that my boundaries were healthy rather than selfish. Your father and I had a long talk about the pattern we've been enabling, Mom had said. We realized that by always pushing you to help Amanda out of every difficult situation we were teaching her, that she didn't need to be responsible for her own choices. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't good for her either. She'd also mentioned that Amanda and Derek had started hosting Sunday dinners at their rental house, taking pride in their ability to provide hospitality using their own resources rather than depending on someone else's generosity. The whole family dynamic feels healthier now, Mom had admitted. Everyone's more honest with each other. But it was call number 78, which had come just last week, that brought the story full circle in a way I hadn't expected. Amanda's voice carried a warmth and genuineness that reminded me of our childhood before adult responsibilities and financial pressures had corrupted our relationship with schemes and manipulation. Frederick, she'd said, I want you to know that Derek and I have been talking about what happened, and we understand now that we were wrong. Not just about the condo, but about the whole way we've been approaching family relationships for years. She'd gone on to explain that they'd started seeing a family counselor to work on communication skills and financial planning. partly because they wanted to break the cycle of manipulation and dependency that had characterized their marriage, and partly because they wanted to model healthier behavior for Sophie and Marcus. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that when we manipulated you and other family members, we were actually hurting ourselves by avoiding the satisfaction that comes from genuine accomplishment, Amanda had continued. Derek's really proud of his success at work now because he knows he earned it through his own efforts. But the most important revelation had come at the end of that final call when Amanda had asked a question that suggested she finally understood the deeper lesson in what had happened between us. "The thing I keep thinking about," she'd said, "is how patient you were while we were taking advantage of you. You could have called us out immediately, but instead, you let us dig ourselves deeper and deeper until we had to face the consequences of our choices. Was that intentional? Were you trying to teach us something?" I'd thought carefully before answering that question because it got to the heart of what the entire experience had meant to me. "Amanda," I'd said finally, "I think the best lessons are the ones people learn for themselves. If I just lectured you about manipulation and taking advantage of family, you would have argued or made excuses. But when you had to face the real consequences of treating someone's generosity as entitlement, you learned something that will stick with you forever." "You're right," she'd admitted. "And we're better people now because of it. Derek and I are actually happy. Really happy in a way we haven't been in years. We're proud of what we're building together." As I reflected on those 78 calls and the journey they represented, I realized that the real victory hadn't been in selling the condo or getting revenge on people who'd manipulated me. The real victory was in the transformation of my family relationships from patterns of exploitation and enabling to something that resembled genuine mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Derek had discovered that he was actually quite good at his job when he focused on excellence rather than shortcuts. Amanda had learned that she was capable of managing a household and supporting her family's goals without depending on manipulation and lies. The children had learned that their parents were strong and capable people who could provide for their family through honest work. Even my parents had learned valuable lessons about the difference between helping family members in genuine need and enabling destructive patterns that prevented people from developing self-reliance and personal responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that kindness without boundaries isn't actually kindness at all. It's enabling behavior that ultimately hurts everyone involved. True generosity requires the wisdom to know when helping someone means giving them what they need to succeed, and when it means refusing to participate in their schemes to avoid personal responsibility. The morning sun was getting stronger now, painting the mountain peaks with shades of gold and pink that made the whole landscape look like something from a postcard. My coffee was getting cold, but I didn't mind. This was my time, my space, my life. Built on my own terms, without the constant drama of family members who saw my success as their entitlement. I thought about the upcoming holidays and how different they would be this year. Amanda had already invited me to Christmas dinner at their rental house, with the understanding that it would be a celebration of what they'd built through their own efforts rather than a manipulation session designed to extract more favors from the family pushover. The invitation felt different because it came from a place of genuine affection rather than calculated strategy. Amanda and Derek wanted me there because they valued my company, not because they were working an angle or setting up their next scheme. That was the kind of family relationship worth maintaining. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see Amanda's name on the screen. "Derek got another promotion, regional manager now with his own office and everything. We're taking the kids to Disneyland to celebrate, and we're paying for the whole thing ourselves. Thank you for teaching us that we're stronger than we thought we were." I smiled as I typed back, "Congratulations! You both earned this through your hard work. Enjoy the vacation." As I set the phone back down and returned to watching the sunrise, I reflected on the deeper lessons that emerged from this entire experience. Family relationships, like all healthy relationships, require mutual respect, honest communication, and clear boundaries about what behavior is acceptable and what crosses the line into exploitation. Love doesn't mean accepting unlimited manipulation from people who claim to care about you. Generosity doesn't require you to fund other people's lifestyle choices while they lie about their circumstances. Being a good family member means supporting others in their efforts to become stronger and more self reliant, not enabling them to avoid the personal growth that comes from facing challenges honestly. The most profound realization was that by refusing to continue enabling Amanda and Derek's manipulation, I hadn't damaged our family relationships. I had saved them. The people calling to thank me for forcing them to face reality and develop genuine self-respect were healthier, happier versions of the family members I'd been unknowingly undermining through misguided generosity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their poor choices. Sometimes the kindest response to manipulation is to let people experience what happens when their schemes fail. And sometimes the best way to preserve family relationships is to insist that they be based on truth, respect, and mutual support rather than exploitation disguised as need. The sun was fully up now, promising another beautiful day in a city where I could build the life I wanted without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next family crisis that would require me to sacrifice my own goals for someone else's schemes. I learned to distinguish between helping family members who were genuinely struggling and enabling family members who preferred manipulation to honest effort. That wisdom was worth more than any property I could own because it gave me the foundation for building relationships based on authentic connection rather than the exhausting cycles of crisis rescue and resentment that had characterized my family interactions for too many years. As I headed inside to start my day, I thought about the question I wanted to leave with anyone who might find value in this story. When someone in your life consistently creates crises that require your rescue, are you actually helping them by providing that rescue? Or are you preventing them from developing the strength and skills they need to create genuine stability in their own lives? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between being seen as generous and actually doing what's best for everyone involved? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more real-life experiences about family boundaries and personal growth. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of healthy boundaries in family relationships, please share this story with them. Thanks for listening, and remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching people that they're stronger than they think they are.